Hello, friends around the world. My name is Brandon Naber. Welcome to the Naberhood, where we have switched on, fun discussions with some of the most brilliant, successful, experienced, talented, and highly skilled sales and marketing minds on the planet from the world's fastest growing companies. Enjoy. Hey everybody, we've got Max Crowley on the show today. Max joined Uber in August 2011 as employee number 25 at the company. Uber is now launched in over 500 cities in 75 countries globally. They IPO'd in May 2019, and they have a valuation of $84 billion. During his time at Uber, Max launched and built two large businesses for them. His first role consisted of launching and building out Uber's business in his hometown of Chicago, Uber's fourth market. As Uber grew, Max managed the entire Midwest team of marketing managers and was responsible for hiring in the region. In 2014, Max relocated to San Francisco to work directly for Uber's chief business officer. Along with a small team of engineers, Max spearheaded and launched Uber's first B2B enterprise group, Uber for Business. There are now 150 people plus working on these teams globally, and Uber has over 75,000 companies actively using the platform. Max has since left Uber. He is no longer associated with the company, and he does not speak for Uber. Max currently lives in New York City. He's an active world traveler, and he's an active angel and early-stage investor. Here we go. Max Crowley, good to have you on the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for coming on. I mean, it's the pleasure's on this side of the table, on the desk, all on this side of the ocean.
Exactly. I was going to say that side of the pond or whatever.
That's right. The massive Pacific Coast pond. You are in New York City right now?
I'm in New York City. We work in Soho, Tribeca area.
Nice one. And you live around the area?
I do. I've been in Manhattan since November. So going on 7-8 months in New York.
Nice. So I said that like I didn't know that. Like you and I have talked for years, and I know exactly what's going on in your life. But not everyone does. So, what's your favorite part about living in New York so far?
The energy. I had a friend the other day describe it as you could be sitting at your desk and you need to pick me up, and literally in New York, you just walk outside and it just hits you. And there's people. It can be any time of day. There's people everywhere doing everything possible. It's completely diverse. It's all walks of life, doing all walks of every possible profession thing. It's the best. And so for me, it's something that, for me, it's a little bit of like feeding the beast. I mean, I just sort of like drink from the fire hose that is New York. So yeah, I love it.
You being the beast. Nice one. And I want to talk about your personal journey. So we'll kind of get into how you got to New York, because you've been in a few different major markets. You've been all over the world with both some of your traveling and for work as well. So why don't we start there? Why don't we start with some personal stuff? And I want to go all the way back though. I want to know Max J. Crowley as a kiddo for a few minutes. So could you give us like 5 minutes on what it was like being a kid as Max Crowley, what you were like growing up, and then kind of walk us through your childhood?
Yeah. Well, I was a total pain in the ass kid. So what it was like being Max Crowley, what it was like being my parents. So I'm from Park Ridge, Illinois. So literally grew up like 5 minutes from O'Hare Airport, about 20 minutes from downtown Chicago. So just on the edge of Chicago. Sort of a city vibe, a suburb vibe at the same time. Definitely sheltered community in some ways. Right on the edge of the city, but like the first sort of suburb. And, my parents kind of scrapped and everything else to get us to that town, which was like sort of a feat, I think, in their minds.
Right.
And,
right.
My mom didn't go to college. My dad went to college, I think. And, but, I think, so we're like, my grandparents were blue collar people, South side, West side of Chicago. And so, I think my parents were definitely the first to kind of like push us to the next level. And everything was about my sister and I. Everything was about everything they could do to make us great and to make us better than them. To just an insane degree. I mean, to the fact that like my parents still have a mortgage on their house and they bought it in 1983. And it's
Right.
basically because they just pulled money out of this thing for 30 plus years so we could go on a yearly vacation and I could go to college. My sister could go to college. We didn't have, probably I had half of my tuition, paid off by them. So I didn't have that bad of loans coming out. My sister wanted to be a teacher, and that enabled her to be able to do that without having crazy amounts of loans. So, truly like a team. When I think about my family unit, it's like truly was a team effort of like, all right, we came from this. My grandfather threw my mom out at 17. Like she was like,
Wow.
no college, basically no backing. My grandmother was great. But she was pretty much on her own, got sales jobs, like just built an awesome career for herself. Wow. In a lot of ways, then quit to raise us, and just so again, it's like this team family unit of like, all right, let's pack together. We're gonna have fun. We're gonna do this, but like, let's see where we can take this thing. And that's at least sort of the view that I've had of it. And super lucky. I've had some success by the time I'm 32, and been able to give back to them in a huge way. And so I think that's at least looking back on I can give you some specifics about me as a child, but that's sort of the high level of kind of where I'm from and what in a lot of ways drives me now.
Cool.
Day in and day out. So
I love it. So what is your, can you tell me what your parents did for work, what your mom did for work before she was raising you guys full time, and what your dad did for work?
Sales, all sales.
All sales.
My dad, they met selling. My dad was selling, my dad was working for TriStar Pictures, which became Sony Pictures, doing like video to video stores, which don't really exist anymore. But even like your big brands were buying videos direct from these companies and putting them on shelves, or Blockbusters, or whoever else. My mom did the same thing with records.
Oh,
and
cool.
Then became CD. So that's how they met. My mom was at CBS Records, which became Sony Records. My dad was at TriStar, which became Sony Pictures. And yeah, they met like calling on accounts. So they're just like hustlers.
Cool story so far, the family unit. Now, what about Max as a kid? What was Max like? What was your personality? What were the things you were interested in?
Disruptor, total pain in the ass, class clown, had to be the center of attention. Like was Santa in like the school play in first grade. All the way to was always in trouble for running my mouth. Had a million detentions for insubordination. And then I was not a great athlete, and I did like plays and musicals and like sang and things like that.
Oh, that's
which
cool.
I don't ever talk about. I actually got thrown out of the senior year musical for being a pain in the ass, which I can't imagine many people have been thrown out of a musical in high school, but I take that honor. I'm always pushing the envelope. I live on the edge. It's one of the things that I do, for better or for worse, which a lot of the things about myself, I think. And yeah, and that, has translated like through the rest of my life.
Cool.
I think it's funny. You as you get older, I think you start to be able to kind of like go back and parse through things that happen to you, and there are things that become good traits later on, and things that you improve on, and whatever else.
Awesome. All right. So you graduated from high school, kicked out of your senior play, and you're like going straight to University of Iowa. Why University of Iowa? And tell us a little bit about Max at University of Iowa.
I wanted to go to a Big Ten school. That was just kind of for whatever growing up was like the goal. Cool. That was like sort of if you do that, again, sort of arbitrary in a lot of ways, but I think if you go to a Big Ten school, that's a huge feat. And so I was looking at schools like Michigan State, Indiana, Iowa, sort of the mid-tier Big Ten schools. And yeah, it ended up being, it was great. Campus is beautiful. School was fine. I think in a lot of ways lucked into majoring in business. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I took classes all over the map. I was not a great student, and I sort of just did what it took to get by, which lucky enough was able to get me into a Big Ten school. And then when I got there, I didn't know what I was doing. I actually had a really bad first semester sophomore year. I had like a couple D's. It was just a disaster. And Yeah, I took a microeconomics class. So I was in a fraternity, and everybody in it was majoring in business. And I had no intentions of majoring in business when I went to school. But something about the camaraderie with the group and starting to actually own some pieces of the fraternity, like I was the kitchen manager and I was managing getting everybody meals every day and getting supplies in the closet. Then I became the social chair, was managing the books behind that, was throwing parties all the time. Started to think about how much it costs to throw a party, how can you make money on, how do you sort of get a flow for the fraternity, and work in a group, like work in a unit. You've got like 9 people that lead the fraternity, and it's the first time I'm in like meetings and whatnot. And I think, look, growing up, definitely sort of natural leader. I was the only youth on our like minister search committee at my church growing up. So just like some random stuff like that, where again, you sort of go back and kind of think about your life and like, I can't believe I did that. But obviously adults saw something in me that, that they appreciated even when I was bouncing off the walls or whatever else, half the time making them angry and half the time, ideally or hopefully someone saw something in me, and tried to like pull it out. And those were looking back in my life, those were the best people, the people that saw through the craziness and were like, all right, there's something with this kid. Let's help get him to the next level. And anyways, so at school, I think, when I was in my fraternity, you start to do more formal leadership stuff. And maybe my brain started to see that more, where it was like more obvious, like, oh wait, like this is kind of a little business. We take in dues, you have budgeting, my best friend was the treasurer. We're jamming all the time on how to spend money most efficiently. How do you push it to make the best formal we've ever had? And, so that just kind of let me, and I took a microeconomics class, and then why would I not do this? And then I started to get competitive too, in that, wait, all these other people around me are majoring in business. If they're doing it and are going to get better jobs or whatever else, well, I'm going to do it. And yeah, and I think it was one of the best things that happened to me. Even though you learn whatever you learn, I don't think majors matter. For me, it was more about putting me on the right sort of trajectory, where I started to kind of professionalize a bit. And so, I think up to that point, I had no reason to care about being a professional. And then I started to think, all right, what is the next level of this? And I was the Monster Energy drink rep on campus. I got 1,000 cans of Monster every month, and they paid me $200, and I had to throw events or whatever and pass those out. Was waiting tables, was doing all these things. And, I think, especially looking back now, I started to see this kind of like scrappiness, hustler, doer, maker. And I just never thought you could do any of that stuff professionally and be successful. But that was sort of the beginning stages of me kind of piecing these things together. And again, before I even knew what I was doing. But those were the play. And I'd grown up, carrying golf bags, and I was caddying at 13, all summer. And, again, always sort of hustling, making money, selling stuff on eBay. But you're sort of doing it to get by growing up. And then as you get older and you start to have, a little bit more of a outside of your head mind space, you can kind of think about things. That was when I started to just sort of get my mojo and started to become clear, wait, you can kind of piece these things together into a thing. And so anyways, that's where, ended up majoring in business and, graduated in 4 years on time, finance degree, and, set me up for whatever I was going to do next.
Awesome. It takes years and years and years to become an overnight success. And when you do retrospect on those individuals and you profile those individuals, talk to them enough, you realize that they have that in them from a young person. The hustle, the entrepreneurial spirit, the scrappiness, the making cash, the energy behind all of that, the ambition. And you're one of those profiles that it sounds like, it just like looking back, you probably think to yourself like, well, I guess that kind of makes sense why I became the adult human that I am right now and in the place you are professionally. All right, cool. So
yeah, I preferred a college tailgate where I set it up. We rented a house near the football game, paid off the owner, collected, $50 at the door, pre-bought beer, sold tickets at the front, made quick $1,000, then going to the football game. Like that was a much better Saturday than getting drunk and going to the football game. So, yeah, I think at the time, it seems obvious, but yeah, when you start to go back and look at these things, it's kind of funny thinking about, Yeah, and again, I mean, fast forwarded, but when I started at Uber, I mean, it was like, wait, these are all, the scrappiness was something that was like sort of an ethos that was sort of naturally in me, and just something you don't really think about.
So you graduate from University of Iowa, you go into Accenture right away. Tell us what you were doing there for a couple minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I was the only person from Iowa to get a job at Accenture that year, because I was graduating 2009. So I got that job in November 2008, which like everything was going nuts in October. So the stock market 08 was obviously what 08 was, but by the fall things were looking really bad. And yes, they pushed me back a little bit on my start date, but I was able to keep the job. And again, it was just more of a hustling thing. I think for that it was more like just competitive and maybe even an ego of just, I don't want to not have a job when I graduate and be that person that doesn't have one. And the best people I know are out hustling for jobs, so I'm going to try out and out hustle them. I'm going to go do 50 interviews on campus and meet every person and go to the happy hours and run around and find anybody that I know at Accenture and ping them. And again, some things that I think were just more natural to me. But I sort of just hustled my way and got that gig on campus, and no one else did, which was just kind of crazy.
That's cool.
And
good confidence building.
Yeah, I mean, because then you end up at the first day, and it's University of Illinois, which is a way better school than Iowa, Northwestern, Michigan, bunch of top tier East Coast schools, and then me. And I think that was the
chip on your shoulder immediately.
Yeah, and also just I can do this. Like, I'm gonna always be this guy. I'm always gonna be the dumbest guy in the room in some ways. But like, I'm down for that. It's like, I mean, they've got the analogy, like, whatever. I don't know. Chip on my shoulder. I can prove that I can do this. I can prove that, that me, from where I'm from, way I grew up, Iowa, I can do this.
Grassroots. And then what were you doing at Accenture? Can you tell us like maybe 1-2 minutes on what your job was?
I mean, I was just a consulting analyst. It wasn't glamorous. The people were awesome. My managers were the best. My coworkers were awesome. I was not very good at that. Like, hopefully at this point I never have to go get a job as like a systems integration consultant again. But if I do and someone listens to this, they shouldn't hire me. I was pretty bad.
It would be ironic if that's like your go-to in like 10 years. All right.
I get random LinkedIn messages where people are like, "Hey, we're looking for like a systems integrations architect for like Oracle." And I was like, I was the worst. I was the worst. The worst. I was probably the last employee at Accenture that year.
All right. So you're a terrible consultant at Accenture, which makes a lot of sense. And then, so after Accenture, you moved to Uber. So you joined as your employee number 25. You joined in August 2011. Why did you make the jump? And what are you hired to do?
Yeah, I mean, so going back to the Accenture stuff, I was a terrible consultant. To the point where, again, I can't say enough about how good the people were, how amazing the people were at Accenture. And again, it just comes to this, sort of thing in your life where, especially for me, just people just kind of, I'm a handful of times with the right people just kind of saw through it and just helped me along the way in such an unbelievable way. I mean, I remember when I left Accenture, my boss sent me a note that was basically just like, something along the lines of like, if you put your heart and soul into this thing as much as like you did in getting the job, you're going to be wildly more successful than you were here.
That's good advice.
And anyway, so yeah, no, and I think just having that support, I just always felt a ton of support from a lot of people along the way. So I was working at Accenture and I was not very good at it. I didn't love it. I didn't really like it at all. And I was reading about startups all the time, and I would ping CEOs and founders and such, and pretty much universally people would ignore me. And Groupon was really hot at the time in Chicago.
Right.
And so, Chicago had the startup bug a bit. And so, that was kind of going on. And so, again, I was pinging people. I read about Uber, and I just thought, this is going to be like, this is super cool. This would be so cool in Chicago. I read that they wanted to launch in Chicago, and I just thought that this would be the most insane professional, like my job could be to slang this cool car service company in Chicago, like get people in Chicago to use this thing. That would be a dream job. And so I wrote up a really simple business plan: why Chicago, why I would launch it there, tactics for launching there. And I found Travis Kalanick's email on the internet. I sent it to him, and he ignored me, and or he never saw it, he said. So then I tweeted at the guy that was running New York at the time, and he responded. He only had like 300 Twitter followers or something. So I was like, all right, this guy might respond to me. And so he responded, and he got me in touch with Ryan Graves, and Ryan and I did a Skype call, and he was 3 hours late. And
3 hours, that's ridiculous.
Ridiculous. And I waited on Skype, and we were about halfway through the call, and he just said, I don't think you know what you want to do. I don't think this makes any sense. Like, wish you the best. Seemed like a good guy, but this isn't a thing. And so I was crushed, bummed. I spent a couple of weeks trying to get a hold of these guys. I finally did, and I blew it. And a couple of weeks went by, and I saw at work again, miserable, mess around on Twitter, and I see stumble on Graves' Twitter profile, and I see he had tweeted, I'm going to be at this bar in Chicago for the next 2 hours if anybody wants to come here and talk about Uber. And I was like 2 hours outside the city. I tell my boss, and we were working long hours at Accenture. I was like, I got to go. I barrel into the city, go home, change, run to the bar, and she's like, he's gone. But I heard him talking, and I think he might be down the street at this other bar. So I race over there, and he's there. And him and I, kind of hit it off. And he's like, I'm so glad that you came. Let's do this again soon. So, that night or next morning, whatever it was, I send him, done something, thank you. I don't hear anything. 2 weeks go by. I see him tweet again. I'm in Chicago, whatever. I'm like direct messaging him. Hey, like, let's meet up, please, please, please. He's like, all right, why don't you do this project for me? Write up every influencer in Chicago that you would get a hold of and how. So I do that. Write up a marketing plan. Do this. Write up start blogging personally and give me some set of blog posts. So this is like now like weeks and weeks and weeks of like random things, and I'm doing these projects, and we'll see him randomly. Met the other person they had hired in Chicago. And then, one day he's like, I'm in this hotel lobby for the next 30 minutes. If you want to come by and talk to me, come here now. Shoot over there. And then, it's funny enough, I'll never forget it. I rolled in, he's on his computer, like in his MacBook, just like so cool. And I'm like, this is so cool. Like, this could be me. Like, I could be doing this job. Versus like, I'm like a consultant. I got all these laptops. I have like 5 laptops on me. I'm like VPNing in my badge. And so anyways, he again basically says no, like, we're taking a risk on you and all this. So I call my mom, and she said, kind of, screw this. You're great. You're a star. You've got a nice career ahead of you at Accenture. Flip it on them. Tell them that they're the ones that, you're the one taking a risk. And like, sort of take away clothes a bit. And so she helps him write this email. I send it to him, and he responds 30 seconds later and says, I'm on the next flight to Chicago. Pick a place for dinner. So we met for dinner, and it was Alan Penn, who was first hired in Chicago. Ryan and I had like a crazy long dinner. It was storming out. We're like sweating. It was like the middle of the summer. And then at the end of it, he's like, we're going to hire you. Cool. And the way I went. So yeah, it was crazy. And it's crazy because obviously now the thing becomes so successful. And so, you don't, look, all this stuff's like luck and timing and everything else. But I think, the process, it was just, I was in love with what the job was going to be. And, I think the process, then you can't get a thing, you become even more and more motivated. And Ryan Graves is awesome and like the coolest dude ever. And so, I think that also was just like this bar that I really wanted to reach. And he'd hustle and scrapped his way to get the job too, which is, now a famous story. And so, in a lot of ways I sort of saw, myself in him, and it made me really, really want it. And then, the minute I had it, it was off to the races. It was crazy.
Awesome. Great story. Wow. I got the chills twice in that story. That's great. Okay. So you're going full steam into Uber at the time. Is your first project launching Uber Chicago?
Yeah. So then it was basically the next day. It was Alan and I in a co-working space, box of iPhones, yellow pages, calling drivers, getting drivers in the office, basically telling people what a smartphone is.
Awesome. Keep going, dude. Like, tell us about this process. So what I want to know, and I think people want to know this. Two things. I'd love for you to, while you're going through telling this story, talking about the specifics of what you're doing, like yellow pages or box of iPhones, like get down to the specifics and bring us to the place where you were. But launching new markets is one of the things that I want to talk about, because one of Uber's superpowers is like launching new markets and doing it really, really well through adversity, all odds, and having it be extremely successful. So when you're launching Uber Chicago, tell us about that process. Walk us through each phase of launching Uber Chicago as you would, launching a market. And then we could talk about, marketing, PR, biz dev, and social media as you were owning those things.
Yeah. I mean, it was really simple. So at the time, Uber was in San Francisco. New York had launched in April. So San Francisco was summer 2010. New York was like April 2011. And then we were August 11 along with Seattle. And then Seattle actually launched in August. We did a soft launch in August and we officially launched like September 20th. And, Alan and I were basically the first two employees in the field. And Austin Geit, who's like the most amazing person ever. She was like the first intern at Uber. She had just done every job and then flew to Seattle and launched that market. So it was basically Alan and I, and then Brian Graves was helping us get Chicago going. So sort of simultaneously was sort of the first time Uber started to build like the launch muscle. And it was as simple as you get a couple of drivers on the road. So at that time, you sort of incentivize supply to be on the road. In order to have a two-sided marketplace, you've got to start with supply. You have to have supply. The only way you can ever have demand is if you have a thing to sell. We would start by getting drivers on the road, giving them, sort of a minimum such that they would be on the road for the hours that we needed them out there, and, incentives to make sure they were accepting dispatches and such. And so, it was literally, basically a week later, Ryan, Allen, and I were in a co-working space conference room at midnight, and he called one of his buddies to take the ride the next morning. And we sent out a email to the, probably 300 people that we had signed up in Chicago at that time and said, secret Ubers are on the road tomorrow. And the next morning we had the first ride. It was Tom Conrad, who at the time was like the CTO of Pandora. So random. It was no offense to Tom, but the most random Rider Zero. We did a cool thing when we launched the city, which you had someone cool and interesting from that city be Rider Zero.
That's smart.
But Chicago, we just hadn't done it. No one had we just didn't really have a list, like a launch plan yet. So last minute, Graves was like, "Oh, my buddy's in town tomorrow. We'll just have him do it." He had no affiliations to Chicago. I have no idea why he was even there. But so whatever. So he was the first dude to take a ride, first person to take a ride, and then it was off. And so you would email a few hundred people, and one ride happens, and then an hour later the second ride happens, and then the system kind of starts to work. And so it was black car only, $15 minimum fare, and it was about 2 times what a taxi costs. So it wasn't cheap, but it was still awesome. It was reliable. Pretty much 5-10 minutes, press a button, car pulls up, you can watch it as it approaches, and drivers were great. Open the door, high-end experience, and you only pay for as far as you go. So that was kind of the deal. And we did that for 4 weeks, and then we did an official launch. We were very secretive or whatever, so it was like secret Ubers for 4 weeks. It was a beta period, which was also kind of a unique sort of Uber innovation, which is basically like taking the idea of a software beta to the real world.
Yeah, online, offline exclusivity with the beta. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's something that other brands and such could definitely do, which is just you're just setting expectations, right? It's like, we're not ready for prime time, but this thing's in beta. And we did that for 4 weeks, and it was great. We did another launch September 20th and invited a bunch of cool influencer type people and local entrepreneurs and whatnot to a dinner. Travis gave a really awesome presentation. Garrett Camp was there, the other co-founder, Graves, obviously, Alan and I, and and then did some press that day, and then we've got a market live. So then it shifted into, all right, starting to build supply and demand in the market.
So tell us. So okay, so you do the actual launch in September. You have the influencers in that dinner, and then does the market just kind of take care of itself after that from an Uber perspective?
You're doing things to incentivize supply to be on the road.
So tell us about some of those things. Like, what are you doing to incentivize supply, and like, how did that process work?
I mean, so number one, the key to the marketplace is to continue to grow supply all of its time. So I don't even know if it was totally obvious at that point, but supply was the game, because if there's supply out there, people are going to ride. People always need a ride, and it was so cool and such a game changer that like virality starts to happen. Like, you're going to tell your friends about this experience. You're going to either ride with friends, or you're going to it's the game that starts to take place. So one of the things that you can do is you can incentivize referrals. And so we had a give get program, give 10, get 10, give 20, get 20, get a ride program. So that juices juices demand, juices referrals. But really it's about, you've got cars on the road, you continue to grow supply, demand starts to come in, and then you're growing this referral, this sort of referral engine. And the other thing that we were doing was, if somebody couldn't get a ride for some reason, so we'd be looking all the time. Hey, somebody requested and couldn't ride, or somebody opened up the app and there was no cars around. I was sitting there literally sending emails to these folks all day. And so it was like, hey, so you tried to take a ride and you couldn't, here's $5. Really to kind of cap it off, it's like the baseline is supply and growing supply and ensuring supply is on the road. So incentives to drivers to make sure they're out there. And it makes also, you're not making money from this market yet. So over time, Uber is trying to condense the time from beta launch, and then profitability, or like theoretically profitability. And you're using those incentives at that point to just ensure that there's at least some cars on the road. And Saturday night, there's a bunch of cars on the road. And this is like pre-surge pricing and other things where, you're trying to build these markets up to a place where there is market, equilibrium, or whatever the word would be, of like, this thing's actually working, and it's working ongoing, and it's growing ongoing. But at this point, it's much more manual. Let's make sure there's cars on the road. Riders are sort of naturally using it. Let's incentivize them to tell their friends. Let's do a bunch of marketing campaigns to get them telling friends or get them activating. And then let's be great at customer support. Every ride is rated. Let's follow up on every low rating. I mean, I'm sitting there all day. Somebody had a low rating ride. Hey, what happened? Let me know. Speaking to Alan. Hey, this happened in this car. Can we work on this quality thing? This person's tweeting about us. What's going on? Let me talk to them. This person opened up their app, couldn't get a ride. Let's contact them. And so we're just sitting there all day managing supply and demand of this market. If you do that, then, for the most part, people are having positive experiences, because even if they have a negative experience, they're likely coming back. And again, the underpinning of this is there are cars on the road. Right. And so even though you have to pay for that early, it allows you to actually build the thing. And the different, there's a bunch of obviously things that were different about Uber, but one of them was, it was reliable. For the most part, open your phone and get a ride within 5 to 10 minutes. And there was no other thing that had existed before that where that was the case. And so these were different tactics that basically made that be a thing. And if for some reason we missed the mark, we tried to be on top of it.
Wow. I mean, the thing that blows my mind is how guerrilla it was, how grassroots it was, and that you were sitting there with 2, 3, 4, 5, and then obviously it grew to a lot more people, managing, like one person managing social, giving that anecdotal feedback right away to the person that needs to know what all these different experiences are like. Same thing with managing a bad experience. Same thing with incentivizing. Same thing with, giving people calls. I mean, there's just so much to do when you're running the operations at a really early stage, it sounds like, for an Uber launch. So from that point, sorry, Max, if you want to say something.
No, you hit the nail on the head. And I think, I mean, what was cool about it was very entrepreneurial and scrappy. And so in a lot of ways, we owned our market, the P&L for that market, the supply and demand of that market. We owned the metrics for that market really more than anything. And then we had this so you owned kind of the local unit, and then you had some freedom to test and to do things at the local market.
That's cool.
And we were competitive with the other markets, but in a really positive way, in that we were still this deep camaraderie, because we were all still trying to work. One of the things I learned to do early on was that it really wasn't about me. It was about the mission of the company. It was about this big thing. And it really wasn't about any individual. And, Travis wanted to change the world and saw the world in a certain way and thought that the world should be that way. And so, whatever you want to say about that, I think it was clear that he thought the transportation and reliability and these things were something that people should have sort of, an unlimited access to and an unlimited right to. And again, there's obviously positives and negatives with individuals thinking that they can make the world a certain way. But that is sort of in my mind, the beauty of sort of, entrepreneurship and business building and capitalism, right? And some of the greatest innovations that we've ever seen are based on one person thinking that they can shape the world in a certain way. And some people have a crazy ability to get close to that. But it was very clear early on that we were all part of something that was bigger than ourselves. And I think that has stayed with me to this day. And so what then cascaded down was there was a culture that we were all in it together, and it wasn't about the individual. And so we would work hard at the local level, and we'd compete with each other, and it'd be like, how did Los Angeles onboard 20 SUVs these days, this week? Like, screw those guys. But also, like, how did you actually do it? And I want to beat you next week. And then they'd say, we did this, we rented out a hotel lobby thing and invited drivers there and put up a Craigslist post. We were like, of course, why didn't we think of that? We do it the next week, and we'd onboard 40 SUV drivers. Boston says we want to put ice cream trucks on the system. Genius. We want to do that. And then all of a sudden 6 cities have ice cream trucks on this system in a random Friday in July. Cool. And you're delivering ice cream. And so, there was this really interesting, push and pull that I definitely think came from, and in a lot of ways, this stuff came from a mix of Travis and Ryan Graves were very different people. And they had a really good yin and yang of just like that cascaded down that kind of created this sort of interesting petri dishes at the local level that, again, shared info, competed, and then, this thing just started to, kind of propel itself forward. I mean, we would literally have weekly calls where every city would have to show their numbers to every other city and then account for why those numbers were that way, and had leaderboards and whatnot. And so, but it was in a positive way, and again, it's a really tough balance. And I think a lot of that stuff was lucky and natural and whatever else, but it was done in a way that was positive. It was not a shaming thing. It was, we got to bring everybody forward. And again, I mean, it worked.
I love it. I mean, the authenticity behind the authenticity that is necessary for that to work is probably something you identified with. So people that know you know that one of the things you're known for is being authentic. I mean, it's just really clear and apparent after you talk to you for 30 seconds. And especially that consistently over time. You must have identified with that in the authenticity that had to be, it was just necessary in order for that type of system to work, to have that pull and push and have it be healthy.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there was the early days, no bureaucracy, not a lot of ego. There was too much to do. It was too early. It was obvious there was product market fit, even though, probably half of us didn't even know what that was. But people were using this thing and it was growing. And again, it doesn't mean that every day was hard. The stuff was not easy, I think I answered like 20,000 support tickets in my first year. There was not one day for a year that I didn't open up my laptop and answer, tickets and tweets and all these different things. But obviously, luckily you can do that and have it not be awesome too. So, I feel very lucky that, we put in that work, but it was something that, became really successful. And I definitely took from that it doesn't always end up that way. Yep. And, I think, and there was ups and downs too. So, again, this was not This was not easy. It was not all rosy by any means. But, I think it was, I think those were elements that I definitely took from the whole experience.
Very cool. Maybe 2 or 3 more things. Can you talk about a typical launch plan that Uber goes through in order to launch a city?
I mean, it was some of the stuff I talked about. I mean,
and maybe how it looks different now versus the way it looked back then. Maybe that's a good place to start.
Now it's much more centralized generally.
Right.
So now there's less of a need for the local operations. I think the difference early on was you would actually drop somebody in, they would get to know the market. You had to know the regulations at a local level. You had to know lawyers at a local level. You had to know all the influencers and the people that made that city the city. You had to know what it was, the ethos of the city that made it the city. This was a local thing. Transportation was inherently local. It was drivers in a city. It was riders in the city. If you're launching in Oklahoma City, which, we had a woman who went down there and did that, and she was a rock star, Emily Wisloski. She was flying in there and living there for months and eating, sleeping, drinking, whatever else, like Oklahoma City. And, she had like Nick Collison, I think, who was on the Thunder at the time, like his Rider Zero. And, that was that. And so, you would drop somebody in and they would do all these things. And again, it was a similar sort of 4 to 8 week period ramp. You get to the market in a big way, and then you start to grow it, and you try and get a GM in place who's going to own it in perpetuity. And you get a couple other, leaders on the supply and demand side who they're going to own it in perpetuity. And so that was a bit of the launch plan. And then, that person would then jump to another market, and those launchers would do that for basically as long as they could, which was oftentimes like a year, before they were like, this is crazy. And then they would usually own a market after that. And so, we just had amazing people do that all over the world. I mean, we had a guy who did that in the Middle East, and he was like a guy from San Francisco, and ended up owning massive parts of the Middle East. And, it was like my age, and owned like, massive P&L. And, that was because people, strapped in a lot of ways and buckled down and did these kind of crazy things where they would go into these markets that they had no context on and figure out how to make it happen there. So that was the early days. There's much more of the sort of local ethos. Now, as you fast forward, this thing's much more of a machine.
Right.
A lot of things have been centralized, as they should. Processes have been centralized. Technology has been centralized. Support centers have been centralized. The only way that you can have a system that now does, I have no idea what the numbers are now, but, I assume, definitely millions and millions of rides a week, right? If not day, you have to have a massive operations beast of a system that can actually do that.
Love it. Okay, cool. So you're at this point leading and managing the Midwest team of marketing managers. Tell us about building that team, what you guys needed to be good at, what you were good at. Tell us a little bit about that journey up until 2014.
Yeah. I think, again, it was really this like local ethos. It was people that were, these markets were getting big. Chicago was getting big. We had a lot of different people that needed to now do marketing promotions, do local deals, continue to try and drive demand there. We'd also launched new products. So we'd launched things like Uber Taxi, UberX. So the product portfolio was growing.
Right.
And whenever you did that, you would need people that were owning those things and figuring out how to launch them and building new pools of supply. And then you were launching more markets too. So Indiana and Minneapolis and a bunch of, Ohio, these were sort of offshoots of Chicago. And so, there's about 65 people in the office by the time I left Chicago. So we grew from 2 to 65, in pretty relatively quickly clip. But the complexity of the business had grown significantly over that time.
Yeah, I figured. So a couple questions. What's your scorecard look like, or what are the type of metrics that you needed to look at on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to know whether or not you guys are doing a good job?
You're still looking at, trips, and, if you think about just the city, it was sort of, maybe obvious, but, you're looking at supply pools on a week over week, month over month basis, retention on the supply side. You're doing the same thing on rider growth.
Yep.
Are you signing people up? If so, where are they coming from? A lot of things where we use promo codes a lot across a lot of marketing promotions and whatnot to try and track what's performing, what's not. And, that gave into, and then retention and such on that side, and some early versions of like an NPS of just like what is the customer satisfaction. Definitely, what are the rides being rated, and so it boils down to growth of supply and demand, retention of those things, and then is the market growing at a steady clip, and are these new products growing as well,
right.
which varied from product to product.
Cool. That's great. And then one last thing, and then we'll hop into your move out to the Bay. When you see marketplaces launch, there's a bunch of tech businesses that are trying to launch marketplaces, and that is a massive, massive mountain to climb. But there are a few fundamentals that I'm going to guess that Uber absolutely kicked ass at from a marketing perspective. When you're thinking about some of the things that these marketplaces need to get right from a marketing perspective, are there some best practices that that Uber was amazing at that can apply to these other marketplaces as you build them? Or maybe it's a mindset.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stands out to me, I think, the most is the need to sort of simulate or stimulate. I don't know if the word would be simulate or stimulate, but one of those words for making the thing happen manually. If you look at again, I don't know anything about these businesses, but a Flexport or something, that business is probably a lot more manual and a lot more sort of pieced together.
Good example.
And early transactions are probably way more like offline, and then you're making them online-ish. And that starts to make the thing happen. And then you're saying, hey, we need supply or this thing's never going to work. So let's incentivize supply to even be on this thing, and keep paying them to stay on this thing while we're trying to get demand. And then you try and create this flywheel effect. And it's basically, can you stay alive enough, long enough? Can you keep supply on this thing long enough to get the flywheel effect? It's coming, unless there's no connection between product market fit, in which case, it's not going to work. But it's basically a game of, can I keep this supply on here long enough such that we can get the inertia that makes this thing a functioning marketplace?
All right, so let's jump into 2014. Move to San Francisco, and you are launching Uber for Business. There's a lot of people listening right now that are going to be B2C to B businesses, such that they've either set up a marketplace or they set up a B2C business that they want to grow. They want to grow to a B2B business. Walk through that launch of Uber for Business, and maybe you can take us through the journey of some of the different phases you had to go through in order to build it out.
Yeah, so I moved to San Francisco in late April, early May 2014. What was happening was Uber for Business in some ways was almost more reactive to what was happening in the market. The people were starting to ride for business purposes in droves. So you would use Uber on a Friday night, and then you would go to to the airport on a Monday morning, and instead of opting for a taxi or the train, you were like, actually, I'm going to use that thing I used the last 3 Friday nights and worked great. And I'm going to expense it. And so companies were actually seeing you'd have a travel manager or expense manager who administrator of some capacity or whatever, some kind at a company, and they'd see, what is this Uber thing? Oh, whoa, we've spent blank crazy amounts of money on this, or it was blank crazy number of expense transactions last month. And then they Google it, and it would be Uber is illegal, insurance, craziness, getting shut down. And they would freak out, and they would send an email to the company and say, Uber is now banned. You can't use Uber.
Wow.
And so
that's a challenge.
Uber for Business was sort of both a policy, hey, we think your employees should be able to use this. Here's our insurance. Here's our safety policies. Here's everything else that you need to know about that will get you comfortable with us riding. And let's get on phones with your legal teams. Let's get on the phone with your insurance people, whatever else. Let's ink some whatever that we need to make sure you're good with this. And let's actually launch an awesome policy. And then it was also, hey, there's a massive opportunity for us to grow the business if we make this awesome. And then people are expensing this like crazy. So let's build out some technology that makes it easier for people to use Uber for business purposes. And so myself and a few engineers, a couple other people started to run at this project. And we ended up building a big business. Billions of dollars will go through this platform this year. It's global. We have hundreds of people on it. We've got multiple products. We've got integrations, at the consumer level that make it easier for people to switch between rides. We've got easier ways for people to expense rides. We've got products for small teams, big teams. We've got enterprise products. We've got offshoots like Uber Events where you can buy promo codes, Uber Health, which allows you to ride, allows like rides to be HIPAA compliant and, ride from hospital or nursing homes or something like that. And so, it's crazy. It's awesome. And, it's definitely a thing. At the same time, it was crazy hard. It's by far, it's not by any means, it's huge. It's great, but building a B2B business at a consumer company is supremely difficult. And I think the speed and demand that naturally comes from people that are used to consumer stuff versus how long it takes to build out B2B functionality is brutal. And so, I think what we got into was some tailspins at times where the expectations were just misaligned, and the time it should take to grow a B2B product from scratch to working with a Fortune 500 company is actually a long time. But if you've got a consumer mindset and you're one of the fastest growing companies ever, the expectation is you can work with a Fortune 500 company like day 3. And that's not a thing. And then, I think the other piece was that Uber was awesome. And so we were in some ways competing with ourselves. Was there really a need for an enterprise product? Which is a bit of an existential thing that I still don't totally know the answer to. And obviously I've got a lot of ideas for what it can be, but it was a very unique thing, and I think we did build a lot of those things that did sort of work with the consumer side then. But it's a difficult challenge, and we worked really hard at it and learned a ton. But it was a learning in a lot of ways, and it wasn't easy.
Cool. Give us 2 things that you did that you guys think you ended up doing really well that were some of the difference makers, and then we'll talk about two of the biggest things you learned as well.
Feeding the beast on this consumer side. So things that just people are doing a thing already. Make that thing easier. Make that thing more awesome. Don't try and change behavior or create new hurdles or whatever. It seems obvious, but it's totally not when you're in the belly of the beast. I think then other commercial applications of Uber was really fascinating because, again, you're creating new use cases, not displacing or getting in the way of.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Uber is such a massive, crazy platform that now and it's starting to happen, which is great. But connections with partnering with mass transit, partnering with commercial real estate, Uber pool by companies to actually decrease traffic and actually get people pooling together. Those are some of the sort of the Uber Health stuff, hospital visits, the amount of non-emergency medical transport is just massive businesses, unreliable today. I think these are areas that are really the commercialization of the Uber platform that are just sort of just scratching the surface of what that is today.
Fascinating. Love it. That's great, Max. All right, we're going to round this out. Now you have a few minutes left. We're going to do 2 rapid fire questions. You invest in and work with a lot of businesses at early stage, mid stage, some later stage. Using your experience from Uber, what are the 2 or 3 most common pieces of advice that you give to businesses that you invest in and that you work with?
Act, action, move, do it. Sitting still is not a good idea. So I think obviously you want to be calculated and try and not make a lot of mistakes and be sloppy. But if you can try and be in the details and keep moving, even though that's a difficult balance, it's the right, it's the thing you need to train early, because it's if anything's easy, it's probably a mistake. Like if anything's easy, it's probably going to bite you in the ass. Like the thing that you need, your next like sales win or your next like co-founder for your project, your next hire, they're probably not calling your cell phone, right? They're probably not the next LinkedIn request you're going to receive. And so be wary of anything that comes easy, but be in the details, like build that muscle and keep moving. And if you can try and do that, you're still going to make some mistakes, but like, you know, people are like, action is better than inaction. And I believe that. And then simultaneously just like be in the weeds, be in the details, like put in the extra time. It's not easy. You're tired at times. I'm tired all the time. Like I want to, you know, miss out on things or, you know, whatever. And I do, but it always bites me in the ass. And so like, you know, I learned it from my boss, from Emil Michael. It's just like, you know, the details matter, the details matter, the details matter. You know, so it's just like keep moving, but like stay in the details as much as you can. I mean, it's almost like, you know, like a little bit of a shake. You got to try and be doing that, or it'll bite you.
All right. Awesome, man. That's great. Last question. You've hired a lot of people, Max, a lot of people at scale. What are your best 1 or 2 pieces of advice for those hiring at scale?
I mean, referrals maybe seems obvious, but you know, I think when you're thinking about hiring, when I think about hiring, I just start to talk to a lot of people. So, again, it gets into this, like your next hire is probably not your next LinkedIn request, but your next LinkedIn request might lead to your next hire. By the way, your vision and your pitch and all these different things are going to be better by the 5th conversation than the first conversation. So like, get out there and start doing this, start getting your reps. So, you know, that I would say is number 1. And then number 2 is just like, I mean, integrity matters. Like, again, probably seems obvious, but, you know, you really want to try, you know, I think of it as basically try to do the right thing, or at least feel like you can defend the thing that you did. Because it's really, you don't want to draw sort of lines in the sand, but if you don't feel comfortable defending basically to the death what you've done, it's probably not a good idea. And guess what? It's going to surface. Everything you do, every email you send, everything you say, everything you do is going to come to the surface. And so be ready to defend it. You know, you sometimes need to push the envelope. You sometimes need to do different things. You got to do what you got to do. You got to make your judgments. You got to live with your decisions, but you also need to be able to defend them. So, that could mean that you break a rule, but be ready to defend it to the masses. And if you're not, then you shouldn't do it. And so I think, you know, judgment, self-awareness, honesty, integrity, obviously obvious, but, you know, again, it's the details thing. And if you miss on that, it will hurt you. So I just tried to, you know, surround myself with people that are great. And you're in these relationships with these folks for a lifetime oftentimes. So, you know, I just try and surround myself with people that are awesome and are better than me. And I love being around.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for listening. If you appreciated and enjoyed the episode, go ahead and make a comment on the post for the episode on LinkedIn. If you love the Naberhood podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Until next time, go get it.